Welcome to University Television Presents. I'm Anna Silver. Today my guests are two former congressmen who are visiting campus with the Congress to Campus program sponsored by the Frank Church Institute and the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress. Congressman Tim Roemer is a former six-term Democratic representative from Indiana who served as a U.S. ambassador to India, one of America's largest diplomatic missions. In Congress, he focused on international trade and investment, education policy, and national security. He also served on the 9/11 Commission. Congressman Petri is a former 18-term Republican representative from Wisconsin, where he served as a chairman of the U.S. House-British Parliamentary Exchange, the U.S. House-Japanese Diet discussions, and the House French and German caucuses. For his work, he was made an honorary officer of the British Empire, and he received honorary membership in the Order of the Rising Sun. I'd like to thank you both so much for coming here today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Honored to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk about this program and what brought you here. How did you become chosen for this program?
Well, Larry LaRocco, who's a former congressman from here and a good friend and a classmate of Tim Roemer's, invited us, and we're here in association with the Frank Church Institute at the university under the auspices of the Former Members of Congress organization that Larry is a past president of. And the foundations support the costs of members of Congress traveling to different places in the country, one from each party, to talk to students at different college campuses in communities in really all of the states of our country.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd just add to that, Larry LaRocco is a good friend, a classmate of mine from 1990 when we got elected together. Wow. And he served the people with great distinction and honor here from the state of Idaho. Mm-hmm. Your question about how did we get picked to do this, we volunteer to do this because we think it's so important. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat. We both worked together on a committee when we were in Congress together. And we think it's important to tell students here at this great university, at Boise State University, that Congress is a great institution when it works, that it can work, especially when Democrats and Republicans will work together and try to find common ground. That's not happening today in Congress, but it can happen, and we're examples of that great institution when people put aside differences and look for common ground and get things done.
And that's great. Tell me a little more about what you're doing here while you're in Idaho and at Boise State during your stay.
Well, we're meeting with lots of students. Mm-hmm. We're talking to student groups, comparative politics classes, business and ethics classes, political science classes, classes sponsored by the Public Service Administration, public service degrees, the Frank Church Institute. Am I leaving any of the 7 or 8 classes that we've talked to already?
High school.
And Boise High School, which is one of the most impressive high schools that I've ever been in. Beautiful just a building. Great place. Awesome. And we're talking to students about a couple issues. One, about bipartisanship and Republicans and Democrats working together. 2, public service is an important thing for young people to get involved in. That is a noble career, a worthwhile career, a career that is exciting, and you can make a big difference for the United States of America when you do it the right way. And 3, we're talking about all kinds of different policies with the students. The students are bright, they're engaging, and they're asking us questions about everything from Congress to Saudi Arabia to affordability of higher education.
And this evening we're meeting with the Boise Committee on Foreign or International Relations, a number of community leaders and people from the university and people who live in the Boise area who've had experience in foreign relations and are concerned about issues that face our country.
Mm-hmm. That's great that you two are working together. And are you both going to other schools together, or is this the only one?
Well, we're on this trip to Boise. If we fail and we get into a fight on this TV show and we start duking it out or something, we may never be picked again for this program. But no, we'll go back to Washington after 2 very productive and interesting days here in Idaho, and we'll probably do more programs in the future.
But we team up with different members. I've been at a number of campuses with different friends who served in all Democrats, but with a number of different ones, and I think Tim has done some of the same. This is actually done in addition in the UK, in the United Kingdom. Believe it or not, high school and college students there, as part of their course studies, often take courses on American government and politics and contemporary American issues, and they're delighted to have former members of Congress come from both parties come over to meet with and participate in lessons that British professors are giving on our Congress or a Supreme Court or the presidency or a contemporary American issues. So it's fun for us, and I think one of the things we're trying to convey is you see these people who are congressmen or in elective office, and they seem sort of like objects. They're just real people who are human like everyone else, and who have strengths and weaknesses, doing the best that they can in most cases to contribute to us working together as a country.
That's great. So I'd like to go into some of your background. Tim, you grew up in Indiana, and something interesting about you is your grandfather was actually a professor at University of Notre Dame. Did that have any influence on you and your political aspirations or your career?
So I think it's a good question, Anna. It certainly shows you've done your research to look at my family tree. I come from a family of educators. My grandfather, as you noted, was a philosophy professor his entire life. Very smart, cerebral person. My grandmother was a Catholic school teacher, grade school, very tough, discipline-oriented teacher. My mom and dad both worked at the University of Notre Dame in education, so they really encouraged us to seek as much quality education as we could in our lives. They had a profound impact on me and on my three brothers and sister about pursuing educational opportunities, that any door can open when you work hard, when you create opportunities for yourself, and when you pursue education initiatives. So the entire family, not just my grandfather, but my grandmother, my parents, especially as role models, have had a big influence on public service. They also said to me, I come from a Catholic family, obviously, with the ties that I've just expressed. And my dad said to me one time, I think you and I talked about this earlier, he said, I studied for the priesthood for a while. I found it wasn't right for me, and I eventually married your mom and came out of the seminary. He said, now, if you want to go be a priest, you could do that. And I said, no, thank you, Dad. I am not interested. But he said, okay, well, if you're not, the second best thing you can do, because you're also helping people, is to go into public service and to run for office. So there was always this support from my family, including my wife, who comes from a political family, that this was a very noble, distinguished, and good thing to get involved in. Now, Anna, you'd never know that from Congress today, where it's got about an 8% approval rating, and a lot of people, we just come from classrooms all across Boise State, sometimes there's not as many hands going up to want to run for office as we'd like to see. And I think one of the reasons Tom and I are here is we want to try to inform, inspire, educate, and motivate people that this is really a good thing to get involved in and the right time to do it.
Right, it really is very important. And Tom, it seems like you were interested in politics from a very young age. You were a Boise State delegate from your high school. So did you know from that young age you wanted to be involved in politics?
Well, not only was I at Boise State, each of the 50 Boise State programs in the United States then selects 2 people to go to Boise Nation. Wow. And that's where you see the picture of Bill Clinton
Are you in that picture?
with J.F. Kennedy when they visited the White House, and young Bill Clinton's a Boise Nation representative from Arkansas at the time. So I had the opportunity to go to Boise Nation to represent Wisconsin back in 1900 as a junior in high school in 1957, and one of my other senators, that we called each other senators, we were all these high school kids, was the fellow who's now actually a senator, Lamar Alexander from Tennessee.
Wow.
And I made a friend, the fellow who was the other delegate at the time from Wisconsin, a fellow named Lee Hebner, went on to become the publisher of the International Herald Tribune, and still made a lot of friends from that particular time. When I did get to serve in Congress, a young guy who himself came to Boise Nation stopped by to see me. He wasn't a constituent of mine. He was from another congressman's district in Wisconsin, but he had discovered that I'd gone to Boise Nation and he was going to Boise Nation. And his fellow named Scott Walker, who's now the governor of Wisconsin.
Wow.
And unlike Bill Clinton, Scott went to Boise Nation, and then he was elected president of Boise Nation. So he invited me, since we'd met each other, to come back the following year, because the last boy standing in the whole country is the fellow who's elected president. He comes back the next year to preside over the activities until his successor is elected, and he invited me to be the keynote speaker at the Boise Nation presidential inauguration of that year. So we've known each other for a long time, and it's certainly been an opportunity for me to make lifetime friendships.
That's amazing. That's why those programs and programs like these are extremely valuable.
Yeah.
So, Tim, you served in the U.S. House of Representatives from Indiana's 3rd District from 1991 until 2003. Tell me about the legislation you worked on and what were the issues that were important to you?
So I think it's important to understand where I come from, my home district. It's a district that is very competitive. A Democrat or a Republican could win it. And so one of the things I told my constituents when I sought their vote and when I earned their vote was, I want to go to Washington, work for you, and get things done on policy. And one of my priorities was higher education, and sought the Education Committee right away. That was one of my first choices. So it was important to me to be able to come back home and talk about progress and results that we would eventually get. So I sought to really work hard and become knowledgeable on policy about higher education and affordability of college. I worked from age 13 on to pay for college, and took out loans and didn't pay off those loans back until I was about 30 years old. So how do we try to make sure that education is affordable for all these young people today that are facing even steeper costs and steeper challenges in terms of access to education? I worked on AmeriCorps and the creation of AmeriCorps, which is this Peace Corps type program for domestic participation from young people across the country to work on American problems and American solutions. I worked on national security issues from the Intelligence Committee, and worked on creation of the 9/11 Commission after we were attacked at 9/11 and 3,000 people were killed.
And tell me about some of the work you did with that. What are the outcomes of that?
So I think the 9/11 Commission is different from a lot of other blue ribbon commissions. One is, in our very first meeting, we sat down and we thought about, we never want to see this repeated. 3,000 people killed in New York City, at the Pentagon, in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. What happened in our government? What caused this? What could we prevent in the future? What do we need to do differently from a foreign policy perspective and from our government? We weren't trying to find particularly fault with the Democrat or Republican, blame Clinton or blame Bush. We were trying to find answers for the American people. So the unusual part was, we sat down and we thought about a strategy. How do we propose answers that we can actually pass into law? If we propose 40 ideas to make the country safer, how do we go further and pass those into law? And ultimately, with the help of the 9/11 families, who were really the key difference maker and key factor in doing this and accomplishing this, out of the 41 recommendations we made to the American people, 39 of those were passed into law by Congress. And we have not been hit with a serious 9/11 attack since then.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for your service in that. Congressman Petri, you served in the Wisconsin State Senate from 1973 to 1979, and then you served in the U.S. House of Representatives, Wisconsin's 6th District from 1979 to 2015. That's a really long time to be.
Get stuck in one job.
Tell me about your time serving in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Well, of course, when I was elected, it was in a special election. My predecessor died unexpectedly right after being reelected in the November elections in 1978. And we had a vigorous campaign, and I was elected and sworn in by a fellow named Tip O'Neill, who was the Speaker of the House of Representatives at that time, and had the opportunity to meet and be lobbied, so to speak, by Jimmy Carter, who was president at that time. And the opportunity to serve under a number of different presidencies and different administrations, I was one of the great interesting things of the job, and also in the Congress to meet people who, like Tip O'Neill and a variety of others in both parties, were sort of giants to me as a student, reading about them in the newspapers, and then to have the opportunity to work with them as the committee chairman and as colleagues. It was a great opportunity. As Tim said, when he went through his orientation with Larry LaRocco, they did it up at Harvard College, and that's Tip O'Neill's stomping grounds. You know, that's his district, actually, up in Massachusetts. And Tip came by and talked to them all and told them that they had the best job that they would ever have in their life. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But like anything else, you kind of get out of things what you put into things. And I very much enjoyed the opportunity of serving in the House of Representatives, to have the opportunity to meet people from a whole variety of different walks of life with different problems, and maybe have the chance to actually do something about some of them, and also to participate in working with people from other parts of the country on committees and in the Congress on dealing with our nation's problems.
And if I can jump in for a second here, he's being pretty modest. It's an extraordinary thing to be reelected by your constituency and trusted by them for integrity and for honesty reasons that long a period. I mean,
it's
Tom,
amazing.
You think they would have caught on?
that's a real compliment to his character and his hard work ethic and the work he did for the people of Wisconsin.
And I want to talk about you being an honorary officer of the British Empire and receiving an honorary membership in the Order of the Rising Sun.
Very funny surprise sort of a thing. And so I actually, the way that works, we have in Congress exchanges with other parliamentary groups around the world, and the Speaker of the House, whichever her party he's in, one of his jobs is representing the legislative branch of government, and Tom Foley took that very seriously and would make it a point to meet with foreign legislators and have them for lunch and this sort of thing up on the Capitol. He was, of course, from Eastern Washington State, right near here, and had been on the Agricultural Committee. A lot of the crops grown in his district were shipped to Japan, and he encouraged me, after I was elected to Congress, as did several Republicans, to become active in U.S.-Japan exchanges, because it is a very important relationship. It's a keystone to stability in the Pacific region, and we're much different languages, different cultures, and yet it's vital to each of us that we have good relationships. And so it was hard, but I went over to Japan maybe over my 35 years of service 20 times to visit, meet with Japanese counterparts in the Japanese diet, and host them when they came here. And when you retire, and the same thing with the British. Of course, we've had a special relationship with England, so that's on either side very important. And it's a little different because we have many customs. We're sort of an outgrowth of. We were part of it. Our founding fathers thought they were Englishmen, and then they revolted and became a separate country. But we have a lot of traditions and a continuation of that tradition. So when someone retires and it's come to the attention of these things, I think people at the embassy or in the foreign parliaments will sometimes put a word in with the Emperor of Japan, or there's sort of a process. And I was told, I got a letter from the British ambassador saying, would it be all right if he nominated me for this thing, and I couldn't tell anyone, and I couldn't figure out why. And the answer was, it's really done by the British government, but the Queen has to sign off, and occasionally someone tries to sort of pressure her by leaking something, and whenever that happens, she won't do it. Because she does not want to have people hijacking her prerogative, although she will follow the recommendations in almost every case. Anyway, the Japanese one, I'd never been inside the Imperial Palace. The Emperor used to be regarded as a god over there. People couldn't look at him. Now, of course, it's quite different. It's a democratic country, but there's still quite a bit more distance among the Japanese royal family and the Japanese people. And I'd never been in the Imperial Palace right in the center of Japan. So I wasn't running for re-election, and they did have a ceremony over in Japan where the foreign prime minister would give you this thing, and then the emperor would come out and give a little speech to the three foreigners, myself being one of them, and the 50 Japanese who got this award. And so I flew over just so I could say I saw the emperor, and it was kind of fun.
That's pretty amazing. Congratulations on that.
Yeah.
So I'd like to talk about now the future, and you'd mentioned you visited classrooms today, and not as many students as you may have thought raised their hands that they wanted to be involved in politics. Is that right? What do you see the future for students? How is their morale towards this kind of towards politics?
I would say one thing first. I'm actually very impressed. The students, it's sort of self-selected because I don't think it's required. We did talk to some classes a little bit, but people seem to be pretty serious. When we was asked how many people were working part-time to support them, almost every hand would go up. Many of them were sort of lifetime learners, older people coming back to finish their education or rough up on things. I think people were serious, they were listening, and they were questioning, but not just they were being serious about it and trying to do it, not just try to score a point or make some sort of make fun of the process. So I've been very impressed with the student body here in Boise.
That's great.
I'd say it's an exceptionally smart and gifted and work ethic related student body here, which is absolutely what you want when you come visit a campus. You want hard workers, you want bright people that are perceptive about what are some of the challenges that Tom ran into or that I ran into in public service. How do you set up a campaign? Very smart, practical questions about policy, about organization, about campaign managers, about experience that would lead to whether or not you make the right choice to run for office. I'm very impressed by the students and how hard they work. It is hard going to college just when you're studying. It's a lot harder to go to college when you're working and studying, and you have sometimes even family obligations on that. And a lot of the students that Tom and I have talked to over the course of the past 24 hours, they are doing all three. And you can tell how much they care about their community, how much they want to learn, how smart they are because they have knowledge from work and they have book smarts from BSU. So how do you combine those two things going forward, and how do they, show up to a class where maybe they're not even required to be there and ask us really good questions about our practical experience? So it's been a really impressive and magical and very uplifting visit for me. I've been nothing but super impressed by the people I've met here.
And what have you been telling the students that want to go on and maybe be in a position like you two have been in? What advice would you give them?
We're telling them to run. We need their help. Things aren't going well these days. We go through cycles in American politics, from the election of 1800 when Adams and Jefferson ran against each other. I don't know, Anna, if you remember that election from your history books, but Jefferson was Adams' vice president, and he still ran against him as his vice president, took him on in one of the most vicious elections in American history, all kinds of personal accusations, kind of like we're seeing in American politics and the presidential level today between all the candidates. So things haven't changed that dramatically, and when things do get bad and challenging, that's when we need young, inspired leadership. We need new people stepping forward to lead us out of the trough and the abyss. I think things are going to change for the better in the future, and I think Boise State University students can be part of that growing change to take back our politics and have average citizens be part of this process, not just, you know, the elite people, and make sure that democracy works the way it should be.
Mm-hmm. And we just have a few more minutes, but I'd like to give you the floor to say anything else you'd like to say before we have to go.
Well, I must first of all thank the people at Boise State College for hosting us, and the students for their serious questions and for being such good, gracious hosts for us. I knew about Idaho, obviously, from news stories and knowing people who represented it in the Congress of the United States and that sort of thing. A lot of people in the area I represent in Wisconsin, America's dairy land, have come out to Idaho in the dairy business and some other aspects of agriculture and forestry in Idaho, and they've all sort of said it's sort of a partly hidden gem. It's a very beautiful state, and one that many of them are happy that they moved to and had the opportunity to raise a family here. So I just wanted to see it for myself, and I discovered that they're not all wrong. We're at a beautiful time of year. The campus couldn't be more beautiful. The trees are in bloom,
yeah.
And the river's rising, as they say, and kids are out with their skateboards and their bikes and enjoying the outdoors as well as hitting the books. But it's a beautiful town and a lot of construction going on. There seem to be a place of the future, mm-hmm. many opportunities, and one with a very strong nature ethic. In my district, Aldo Leopold had his shack on the Wisconsin River right at the edge of my district. John Muir, the founder of the Sierra Club, homesteaded as a teenager in my district with his father, and this is something that I think is very important, preserving, enjoying, but also preserving for future generations the natural heritage that we have, and I think that's taken very seriously in Idaho.
Well, thank you so much. And Tim, anything else you'd like to say today?
You know, I would just conclude by saying, and this is not in any way a partisan comment, but that we all need to be able to look in our backyard for leadership. It shouldn't just be Tom coming from Wisconsin and me coming from Indiana. And the wonderful thing about Idaho is they have that. They've got leaders that have led here from the Republican side and the Democratic side. As a Democrat, I would mention Senator Frank Church as an icon in the United States Senate. Not because he was a Democrat, but because he used his imagination to protect land for our children and our children's children and have a vision to look forward. He was curious and knowledgeable about foreign policy, and he wanted to make sure that we did the right things in our foreign policy, projecting power in the right way at the right time. He was instrumental on the Foreign Relations Committee as a senator, and he used the power of government and oversight to try to make sure government was doing what it should be doing and not overdoing things in the intelligence community and not overstretching their power. And the church committee held people responsible for making mistakes. So here's a great example right here at Boise State University of a public servant who has done things the right way and been a great leader for them to look toward and be inspired by. And hopefully, you know, meeting Tom and I can be just one small thing for people to look at, but they also have this presence here in Idaho to this local presence of a great family that has made a big difference in Idaho politics.
Certainly his influence is very strong here still in Idaho. So I want to thank you both so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to University Television Presents. I'm Anna Silver, and have a great day.